Okay, I think we should go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Wong. Welcome to this very special webinar on kids, screens, and COVID. Before I get started, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm one of the board of directors of the AUOA, which is a US-based Otago alumni organization. We are a nonprofit set up to enable US-based alumni to network, support each other, and also contribute financially to the University of Otago. And you can learn more about our organization at our website, which is otagoalumni.us. As a parent myself, I can attest to the fact that the global pandemic has had a significant increase in the amount of screen time for my kids. So I'm super excited to hear from our subject matter experts today, Professor Rachel Barr and Professor Elaine Reese, who John will provide a proper introduction to shortly. For those tuning in live, I want to encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A function on the bottom right of your screen, and we'll definitely have time for those at the end. On behalf of the AUOA and everyone tuning in, I just want to say a huge thank you to Rachel and Elaine for your time and expertise today. And I also want to thank the University of Otago's Development and Alumni Relations Office for helping us set this up. So with that, I'll hand over to Donella Aiken-Ferguson, who is the Manager of Alumni Engagement at the University of Otago.
Thanks, Jono. Kia ora koutou, everyone. It's lovely to have people join us in this virtual webinar, and our sincere thanks to the AUOA for their time and energy to organise these events to keep our alumni in the North America region engaged during this time when we can't visit. I'd also like to thank hugely Rachel and Elaine for their time to present this webinar. I'm certainly looking forward to hearing their expertise and thoughts about how children have been coping during this weird time for everyone. So thanks to everyone. I hope you enjoy it, and please, if you enjoy their webinar and you think others that you know of would enjoy it, let them know, and we will be publishing this on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to watch it again at a later date as well. So with that, I'll hand over to John Crow to introduce our two speakers. So thank you and welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Donella. Yeah, I'm John Crow. I'm the treasurer of AUOA, living and working from home here in Brooklyn, New York, with my wife, 3 teenagers and a 10-year-old. As I look to see my 10-year-old, she's sitting on the couch playing Fortnite with a YouTube screen on a mini iPad right next to her. Our 5th child is actually back in Dunedin at Otago as a first-year health science student. So I'm very much looking forward to gleaning some practical insights from today's webinar. So moving right along, I'm delighted to introduce Professors Rachel Barr and Elaine Reese. Dr. Barr is Professor of Psychology at Georgetown University and Director of the Georgetown Early Learning Project. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Otago in 1999. She's primarily interested in how children bridge the gap between what they learn from media and how they apply that information in the real world. Dr. Barr has published over 50 papers investigating the effects of the content and context of media on early learning. And during this webinar, she will cover the transfer deficit, which is the consistent finding that infants and toddlers learn less from television and touchscreens than from face-to-face interactions. And importantly, how parents can overcome this transfer deficit and facilitate learning from media. I'm also delighted to introduce Professor Elaine Reese. Dr. Reese joined the Department of Psychology at Otago in 1993. She is the education domain leader on a national birth cohort study growing up in New Zealand. She has authored over 80 papers and has served on the Children's Action Plan, a government committee to help at-risk children. Through her career, she has been a principal investigator or co-principal investigator on 4 Marsden grants from the Royal Society of New Zealand. Dr. Reese has followed how parents talk creates change in children's language, narrative, memory, literacy, and self-understanding. She is especially interested in the role of parents storytelling with their children and is the author of the book, Tell Me a Story. So welcome, Rachel and Elaine, and over to you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here as well. And one of the really big bonuses is that Elaine and I got to start talking again, our fields have overlapped quite a bit over time, and I was lucky enough to receive some training from Elaine when I was at Otago, and from Elaine Hain as well, who was my primary mentor. And so this is fantastic. So what we decided that we'd do, though, rather than do a series of slides, is that we would have a conversation and ask each other about our various domains of work, and how children may be affected during this COVID time, based on screens and their learning. So Elaine, I think you were going to start.
Yes, so just thank you everybody for being here today. And it is this is going to be, well, we hope, really fun. And it has been great for me to reconnect with Rachel. And I should just add that that I'm a parent also. I have 2 sons, 19 and 24, who are both at Otago now. The older one doing a master's and the first one doing first year. And yeah, so Rachel and I know each other from way back, and I thought I would just start off by asking you, Rachel, just to get the ball rolling. What do you recommend in terms of screen time? Because I know it's something that everybody is even more concerned about now than ever.
Yeah, and that's always the question. The question is always framed, how much time should we allot to screens? And there has been a lot of recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics. They have recommended various amounts. So for children under 18 months, 0 screens, children 1.5 to 5, about 2 to 3 hours per day, as long as there's some sort of activities around it. And then school-aged children, maybe 3 hours per day, up to. Obviously with COVID, a lot of that has really changed because school has moved online, with, you know, almost 50% of schools are completely remote in the US right now. So I'd rather, one thing I'd sort of like us to think about is not necessarily just the amount of time, but rather what it is that you do with those screens. So all screens are not created equal. And what I mean by that is that you may have a video chat with someone, you may learn from a webinar, you may have a class, you may watch SpongeBob, you may play Minecraft or Fortnite. All of these different interactions serve different roles and have different functions, and involve interacting in various different ways. And so if we think about how people are using screens, why people are using screens, rather than just the amount of time, I think it's going to be, it's a much richer way of thinking about it, because then we might want to reduce some types of screen, but enhance others and support and encourage other forms of use. Because after all, it's just a tool. And humans are just so innovative and creative that they've come up with this amazing ability for us all to connect during this time of COVID. But how it is impacting them will really vary as a function of content and context.
And did you want to say just a little bit about what John was talking about at the beginning with the video transfer deficit for really young children?
Yeah, and it's quite possible. So this transfer deficit is if you learn something via a screen by yourself and you're under 5 years of age, you'll learn less than if you learn it in a face-to-face interaction. And the thing is, though, this transfer deficit can be ameliorated in lots of different ways, right? So, and one way that's quite simple is repetition. So you might, as a parent, have read the same book over and over and over, or watched the same episode over and over and over and wondered if your children were trying to drive you crazy, but they're really not. What they're doing is they're picking up different pieces of information with each different repetition. And then the other thing is, if you are reading it with them or watching with them or playing with them, then they're getting different pieces of information as from you as you are explaining, oh, that's a cat, just like the cat that we have in our house. and helping them connect the dots between what's on the screen and what's out there in their real world. And those two things, talking just as if, so talking like you would around a storybook, if you do the same thing around an app, or the same thing around viewing TV, or even the same thing while you're on a video chat, children really require that support, and that reduces that transfer deficit really significantly. And which sort of brings me to the point, since we have seen that some of the factors that are really important for book reading transfer over to television, you have got a long history of learning about what supports kids in book reading. What do you think would be the main things kids would learn from books, or can learn from picture books?
Yes, I am, some would say, obsessed with children's picture books and and their benefits for young children. There are so many benefits from sharing picture books with your children. One of the main benefits is that it helps their language development. So we know that children learn new words from books, and they can learn words that they might not encounter in their everyday lives. We also know that they're also learning some socio-emotional skills from books. They're learning about other people's thoughts and feelings. So theory of mind learning can come from books, because a lot of picture books go into detail on what the characters are thinking and feeling. And eventually that, their language skills can coalesce into children who have been read a lot of picture books in high quality ways, have better reading skills later on when they go into primary school. And so what we know is that the way you share books with your children matters a lot for how many of these benefits they get. And we know now that there are certain high quality ways that can maximize those benefits. And it's not rocket science, actually. It's very simple. It's about having a conversation about the book as you're sharing it, a conversation that's responsive to what the child is interested in talking about, but that also extends their learning. And so I'm glad you brought up the repeated readings, because I know this is a common theme for parents of young children who, when their children want the same book over and over and over again. And for my sons, it was Thomas the Tank Engine, which I absolutely hated reading. But they are still, every time they're getting something else out of it. And you can have fun with it through the conversation you're having, extending it to different aspects of the book to help them expand their learning. And it's a routine that you can engage in even with babies, with toddlers, with preschoolers. You make it more challenging for the older children. I'd argue that we stop reading too early to our children. We tend to stop reading to them once they go into primary school and start reading for themselves. But actually, they've done surveys of children who say that 5 to 12-year-olds who say they really wish their parents would still read to them. And I think that's something that that we can, in the time of COVID, that the benefit of being stuck at home all the time together is that you can engage in some of these practices that you might not be able to when you've got the daily commute and all the activities. Maybe setting up a tradition of continuing to read to your older children at night from chapter books, or books that you loved as a child and you can share with them. It would be a really nice way to extend the practice.
Yeah, it's it's interesting, just this month as well, a study came out that was book reading via video chat. And it turned out that 4-year-olds could also learn if there was a book read to them via video chat. And so I think this is another way that if you are thinking of different activities to do on video chat with your grandkids or nieces and nephews, or even during Zoom school, reading a book is something that they can also learn and share over the screen too. And it is, when you were talking about what it is that is the key skills, so describing and extending and having this back and forth conversation. We also did a study with 15-month-old babies, and they learned how to work a touchscreen or a tablet, and they learned a game, and they learned how to play the game and transfer it out into the real world. And it turned out that if the parents did every single thing that you were talking about, warm and sharing and following what the child was really interested in, those children were 19 times more likely to learn. I've never had such a big finding. I always say it, 19 times more likely to learn from that app if they had this beautiful back and forth, just like you would do with a storybook. So I think these are things that parents know how to do, that grandparents know how to do, that teachers definitely know how to do, and that we know that really helps in learning to read and learning from screens. But I'm wondering, are the findings the same with ebooks as they are with picture books?
Ebooks are a hot topic of research right now in this area because they are, the use of iPads is becoming so, touchscreens is becoming so prevalent for young children. And what the research is showing is that sometimes those conversations can get a little disrupted when an iPad has too many sort of bells and whistles, like too many hotspots and games and things like that. It can distract the parent and the child from having those high quality conversations. But if the parent and child are reading a basic ebook, they can still have those high quality conversations. So it's really the high quality conversations that matter, regardless of how the book is delivered, as long as kids and parents aren't getting too distracted by all the other features. And then it's sort of a mixed bag, because those features are also really engaging to children, and sometimes they'll even look longer at an ebook than they will at a print book. And for older children, there have been some studies showing that they can actually learn more new words from an ebook because they can use the dictionary function really easily to touch on a word they don't know and have it defined. And that same child is never, ever going to probably, when they're reading a print book, go and look it up in a dictionary.
Yeah, so it's sort of about maximizing those features and designs. And I've also heard that for children who have more difficulty learning to read, or if the books are really well designed, then that can support the learning even more. So sort of the design piece is really hard. Of course, there's 80 or 90,000 apps in the App Store and books that are tagged as educational without any regulation. So it's very hard for parents to pick out stuff from there. But it sounds like there are sort of key principles, like if we can look for things that are engaging and interesting to the child and meaningful, that they invite this social interaction, and that the child is sort of minds on, like they're looking up the word, or they're asking you a question, or they're answering you a question. These are the sorts of games and books that are going to support learning.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That minds on active engagement is the key. Now, I was just thinking about what you were saying about video chat in the video chat book study, which is a really cool finding, that that the 4-year-olds can learn just as much from a video chat book reading as they can from a regular book reading. Do you want to say more about, more generally about learning from video chat?
Yeah, so it seems like learning from video chat, and this is kind of important when we think about remote learning at the moment, especially for little kids, right? Learning from video chat has got this extra information, like it allows you to have this back and forth that is really that key ingredient to learning. And it turns out that there's various different games that they've shown on video chat. So you can show a child hiding something, they'll go find it if it's on video chat. You can show them the exact same video and they can't go and find it because they can't figure out that what is on the screen is related back to the real world. But if it's on video chat and you've got this reliable conversation, then they're going to be more likely to believe it. So they go to find things, they're more likely to copy from video chat, more likely to learn new words and verbs, as long as there's a supportive person, not just on the other side of the screen teaching them, but on the side of the screen with them. So that co-viewer with them, again, is really important, even during video chat for tasks that are hard to learn. And I think part of the thing is that we as adults, we think, although maybe not so much, I think in the past as adults, we thought, okay, the video chat is so easy, everything's right there, or the video is all right there, or the app has got so many interactive components. The child must just be able to pick it up and learn really easily from it. And they can't unless they have support. But I think COVID maybe has made us a little bit more empathetic to these young kids, that really there needs to be a little bit of support around that learning, right? Like, oh yeah, if you look in this part of the screen, or when grandma is pointing to something, she's actually pointing to something behind you, and that having that caregiver beside you just to sort of guide you, not all of the time. Like, I don't want people to go away thinking that parents have to be, you know, especially parents of kids under 5 who are already really stressed out, that they have to be 24/7 with their children if there's any screen present. But just sort of every now and then to provide them extra little pieces of information. And video chat, as I said, it really is both sides of the screen that's important. So if you're talking to grandma and she's describing stuff to you, then having you and the baby there, the adult and the baby there, helps that baby learn even more from that rich social interaction. So humans like rich social interactions, right? Like, this is what we've been saying over and over and over. And how do we maximize that and engineer that properly in a screen to guide and help children to focus and learn is the million-dollar question, really. Yeah. But they can definitely learn more from video chat than they can from other forms of media.
That's really exciting, given how often we're all using video chat these days. And I think it's also good what you were saying about that parents don't always need to be there, because that is I know that a lot of parents are feeling pressured to be there, even with their older children, the whole time that they're trying to do online schooling. And do you have anything you'd like to say about that, about how often do parents need to be there? Yeah, and so, I mean, the thing is, parents know their individual kids the best, obviously, and some kids are going to, be more independent than others, but there's certain things, if there's content that they know well or characters that they know well, or, if you think of an episode of Thomas the Tank Engine or Daniel Tiger, or I'm staying all under 5, or even if you think of like sort of the formulaic nature of a lot of television programs, children are learning that structure. And once they've seen those episodes a couple of times, then that supports their learning. And the best study that I know of from this is, if any of you remember the show Blue's Clues, what the child had to do was go through and find these different clues. And when they first put it on air, they put it on once, and the 3-year-olds couldn't find the clues. But then they put it on 5 times in a row,
And the 3-year-olds got closer and closer to the clues by the end of the week, and they could solve it by themselves at the end of the week. And they were sort of engaged and sort of searching for those different things. So again, that knowing what the child's content is, thinking about the repetition, thinking about the structure, if it's well structured and well developed, they can learn on their own. And this is what teachers are having to sort of navigate at the moment, is figuring out how to structure that information so that the child can be supported, and then knowing the child sort of learning and the parent learning when they need to step in. But a good rule of thumb is just sort of let the child try it out first of all, see what they figure out. And as you would if they were coming home from school at night, ask them, well, what did you find out? What did you learn? And sort of have that conversation with them in a more standard, you've gone to school, you're coming home way. But then if they're really struggling, then step back in again. And that's the thing that I think it's really easy to say. I do also have kids who are on online school at the moment, so I'm totally empathetic to this. But letting them have a go, making sure the structure is good, understanding, looking at those content materials, then they can learn with that structure, and then you can step in to support them, but not necessarily 100% sitting with them. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
And I should add that in that same study you were talking about earlier with the video chat book reading, that they had another condition where it was more like just an ebook reading to the child without the adult support, and children did still learn from.
Exactly. Yes, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's important for parents to know that ebooks are a great alternative when you can't be sitting beside them. Maybe an alternative to some other screen time they might be having, which sort of brings us to the question that I know especially parents of older children and teenagers get very concerned about. I know that I got very concerned about when my sons were adolescents playing video games that were not, well, yeah, they came a long way from Crash Bandicoot, you know, so what do you recommend in terms of content of the media that children and teenagers are consuming?
Yeah, so the thing is, like, so we do know a lot about young kids, and we do know a lot, like, you know, and we know, I just want to follow up on one other thing that you said that I've forgotten to say before, which was, so things like Sesame Street is another example of something that was really well structured, that has been, you know, investigated for 30 years. And we know kids who have this sort of educational media diet, if you like to call it that, if they've been watching Sesame Street from early in development, then this is later related to better math performance, better high school performance, more wanting to read. And so that sort of early interest in education, particularly for families where there's not a lot of other educational resources, Sesame Street was the most effective. And so during this time of COVID, we were kind of all shut in. That's also another thing to think about, that these programs can be very rich in their content if they're well structured and well developed. As time goes on, as they get older, some of that content then moves to video games. And in those video games, there's been really interesting findings from video gamers versus non-video gamers. There's been people who've been trained up on this. And I think the biggest surprising finding is that visual processing, people who play video games more, even these first person shooter games, you are more likely to have better peripheral vision, faster reaction time, good sort of processing of details. So these were somewhat surprising findings. Now, then you're really thinking to yourself, I'm sure there's eyebrows going up and thinking, well, all of this violent content. And so we do know that violent content can have negative effects on kids, negative effect on sleep. And but the thing is that now a lot of these games are multi-platform games. So you get on a game with your friend and you talk to your friend and you play with your friend. And one of the recent findings is that in those cases, that collaboration, that social collaboration over the screen is really supportive. It reduces negative effects of violence, and you don't see any of those sort of increases in aggression or any of those other things that you might be worried about, because they're engaging in this social collaborative game. Similar findings with like 6 to 12-year-olds, definitely in Minecraft, especially when they're creative in that creative mode, but even in survival mode when they're interacting with each other. So what we're seeing even in older kids is this social collaboration is helping them. And then also that there's sometimes these surprising attentional gains that you wouldn't necessarily have predicted. But did that?
Yeah, that's very reassuring. And I do love that finding. Just so the tip is to try to get your teens to collaborate and cooperate, either say with their siblings or with their friends online. And so it's all about connection, isn't it?
Exactly. It's all about connection. And this is, we're seeing a theme here, right? Like this sort of how we use the screens, and how we connect with other people via the screens is really important. And I wanted to ask you if you had other ideas of different ways that people might connect over video chat, even sort of across generations. Because I know the book was mentioned early on, Tell Me a Story, which is I can say is a fantastic book. I always assign it for my students. Wonderful story about how storytelling happens across children. But I'm just wondering, do you have any other suggestions of things that people could do via video chat in this time?
I'm really big on family stories, and I actually think that family stories are even more important right now, because in times of threat, and COVID is a time of threat, we need to connect with the people closest to us. And one way, one of the main ways we do that, well, we have experiences with them, obviously, but we also tell stories about our experiences and share stories with each other about things we've done together. But also grandparents can pass on family history to grandchildren, even some, some funny stories about when the parents were little, and kids of all ages love to hear these family stories. Even teenagers love to hear these family stories. So I do think that grandparents are a real under-tapped resource in making those connections, in strengthening those bonds, and helping children learn their family history. There's some fascinating research from my PhD supervisor, Robin Fivish, who found that kids who knew more of their family history, these were 9 to 12-year-old kids, had better well-being even after they controlled for other factors that might contribute to their well-being. So there is something about these family stories that really helps center children, I think, that helps them realize where they come from, and as they're teenagers, what kind of a person are they coming to be. So I actually created, for National Geographic Family, I recently created a card game for 6 to 12-year-olds about sharing family stories, because I was thinking, it's sort of boring if you're doing a video chat and your grandmother starts going on and on about what their parents were like when they were little. So I created this card game, and the way it works, it's called Whose Story Is It? And you just put a fact about a person in the family history. So the example in the article is who had the nickname Cannonball in high school because he could throw a baseball really hard and fast. And and you get the kids to guess who that was. And I made a low-tech version on index cards. And I think it's just could be a fun, interactive way for kids to learn about their family histories.
Right, and you could play it on something like Kahoots or any sort of app that you ask this. It could be really fun, like the way that you could set it up via the screen as well, or even just with the card game itself, to be able to share those stories. The other, for younger, this reminds me also for younger kids, when grandparents are trying to engage with their younger kids, playing games is another way to really engage with them, right? Because you said card games, and then I was just thinking, well, we sometimes think with video chat, all of us have to be sitting, looking at the screen and talking to each other and totally engaged. And of course, kids under 5 are not going to want to do that, right? And preschool teachers all know this, and grandparents and parents really know this. And so we did this study where we watched grandparents and parents doing video chat with one another, and they came up with all these really great creative games. So they played peekaboo. Some people, grandparents had kids go off and get scavenger hunts. They did, which I thought was a brilliant one. They read books to them. They had meals together, snacks together. So sort of ways of just sharing over video chat as well. So sharing family history, sharing family meals, back and forth is another way of staying connected, and you can try it out in all different ages. And some other, I'm just thinking about this with my friend who had this 2-year-old, and I've told this story so many times now, but it was so great. This little 2-year-old, he really loved Matchbox cars, and my son really loved Matchbox cars as well. So we got out all of our old ones. He got out his, and then this little 2-year-old said, okay, so we'll have a race. Bear in mind that we're on another side, different sides of a screen at this point, right? I said, sure, we'll have a race. And so we had a race, and the sweet boy says, okay, you won that time. Right. And he says, let's have another race. And the second race, he actually won. So that was lucky. It sort of worked out. But like, people are really, I think this is part of this sort of connection at this time, that people are really creative, kids are really creative. Grandparents are able to share really great information and games and ideas. Like the scavenger hunt I would never have thought of, but all of these grandparents were saying, yeah, it's a great game to play with your grandkids. They go off and they do stuff and they bring it back. And so I think there's really creative ways of sharing the screen, especially at this time.
I'm also curious about the app Radio for grandparents, which gets around sort of the logistical problems of sharing a book over video chat. And they have over 200 titles, and the book appears on the screen so that, and then the child can actually help turn the pages and things like that.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
So there's really clever apps and clever designers out there, and sort of part of it is, talking with your friends, figuring out what those good ones are. But yeah, that sounds like a really great one. And if you can't find the app, then just having the same book in both houses can also help. Sometimes you can't find the good time. Like, we've managed to find the one overlap between New Zealand and the East Coast at the moment, right? But also recording stuff for a child. So that, again, they can watch that over and over. There was a lot of work with the military where families were separated, and parents would read books and record them, and then the children could watch them with the book in front of them. And that really helped them sort of stay connected, especially if they couldn't make the video chat time. So I think people are really clever and creative, and maybe in discussion time we'll hear some other good ideas from people as well. But maybe now is a good time for us to open up for some questions from people, if anybody has questions.
Just as a friendly reminder to everyone who's dialed in live, feel free to to jump into the Q&A box if you have a question. Just feel free to type it in, and we can ask it. But John and I can get things kicked off. Rachel, I do want to press on the content question a little bit more. You mentioned when Elaine asked you about the content, how that changes, and then you sort of talked about, well, it's less about the importance of the content, but more about the sort of how, right, the collaboration element of the video game. So if you hold the collaboration elements consistent, like equal, how does content change the outcome of the learning? So is like problem. So for example, I have to confess, I was a gamer growing up, first-person shooter games versus real-time strategy versus puzzle solving and things like that. Does that actually change the outcome of the learning?
So, well, it does, because our brains are sort of ready to learn different types of information, right? And so it's going to transfer different types of information, and the media platform doesn't really change that, like what you're going to get from different things. The dimension that does change, the reason I sort of focused in on these action games was that it was surprising that was really changing people's perception. And across reasonable amounts of time, that was sort of a long-lasting effect of improved peripheral vision, for example. But these strategy games, I mean, I'm going to show my age now, but if you remember the game, people used to play Dungeons and Dragons. And initially they played that and with each other and sort of with pieces, game pieces and so on. And then that type of program, that strategy game, moved into the gaming world as well. So I think that the platform itself is, as long as you are allowing for the different affordances of it or the way that it works, then that's not necessarily going to increase, that's not necessarily going to diminish what you can learn from those strategy games, as long as it's set up properly, right? So long as everybody can interact around that game piece. And the same thing, but in terms of what kids can learn from educational media, I think that's a slightly different question. So for television, educational television, that again, the structure is really, really important. So you can, I had meant to mention this before, but there's a couple of websites that I think are really useful. One is Common Sense Media, and Common Sense Media has got various different ages, and you can put in the age of the child and look at various different dimensions about the content and parent ratings and descriptions and so on. That's very, very useful, because part of it is narrowing down that universe of what to choose. Pbs Kids is another really great site, and the reason for this is that these characters are really important for kids to learn from. They can take that character, learn information around them. That's one of the other really powerful things about book reading. But the nice thing about Pbs Kids is that you've got the video content and then you've got the games. So like Daniel Tiger, which is basically the Fred Rogers show turned into animation. It's great. It's got stories and games and everything else. You can have the show and then you can have the characters there. So that piece does take a little bit of work from up front, but narrowing it down by Common Sense Media or Pbs Kids, those platforms kind of help you go into the universe where, and the other one is Noggin has got some good content and good development as well. There's a lot of the difficulty for parents is, in my view, in terms of thinking about that content, is that there are tons and tons of things out there that have not been well validated or well researched or well thought through. And so trying to narrow down that universe by both thinking, looking for the content on these few websites and then watching it yourself and saying, is that something that my kid really likes? So you might have a child who loves going to the zoo. So like the National Zoo at the moment has got a webcam on the little panda. And that might be something that your child loves to go and see. My children, not so much. They're not very pet or animal oriented. So they would rather go to a cooking website or a cooking show and learn how to do that. So thinking about your child, their interests, thinking about the way that that content has been developed and sort of vetting that, and then trying to come in and sort of share that experience with them, not 24/7, but share it with them so that they're actively engaged and interested in it. Those are kind of the ingredients there. They're called the 3 C's: the child, the content, and the context. And so solving those 3 C's for your individual child is the key. So does that kind of push back a little bit on that content question there?
Yes.
And I can for kids under 3, there's these resources also. 0 to 3 has got Screen Sense resources as well. We can share all these afterwards too.
Hey, I've got a question. I've got 3 teenagers at home and a 10-year-old, and they're consuming a lot of content, and you type of outlined at the start, it's kind of like, not all content, you've got to look at the quality of the content and the purpose and all the rest. And it runs the full gamut of YouTube videos, TikTok, Instagram, all the way through to all those great collaboration games where, they're on Minecraft and Fortnite, and they've got a Discord channel. So they're talking to somebody in different places, whether or not it's upstairs in the house or in different cities. One of the things that we're finding is that the kids spend a lot of time, so they switch from one type of screen, which could be mindlessly scrolling through TikTok or Instagram, which I don't necessarily value highly or think it's necessarily great for the kids to do, to then swing into, hey guys, let's get together and play these collaboration games. So my question is, how do we go about encouraging some self-policing that, that these teenagers, they're beyond toddlers, how do we encourage them to self-police their own video consumption or screen consumption?
Yeah, so turning off is the hardest thing, right? And especially now when you can't go out and play with your friends. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has come up with these media plan guides for families. And essentially what it is it's a series of questions that you can go through with your teenager. And it's a negotiation, but you sort of negotiate various different points, like what times of the day would I be able to do this? What sort of content would I be interested in doing? When am I going to ask you or talk to you about things? Like, so there's different, and also just a little bit of a discussion about safety online, right? Because there's a lot of predatory stuff online as well. So do I have to ask before I download an app? What are privacy settings? And really, do I just click accept, or should I be thinking about some of those things? And those sort of more nefarious practices where what they'll do is they'll say to the kid, you have to come on tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you're at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll get 20 gems. If you're not on at 3 o'clock, you're going to miss out on those gems. It doesn't matter that they're virtual and that they're not actually real things. They want to go on at 3. And the point of the app developer is to keep them on for longer, right? So those are the types of things that you want to be asking about and talking about with them. And then this media plan, this is American Academy of Pediatrics, has got this media plan that kind of just helps walk through some of those discussions. And then they will come up with time and questions and amounts and so on. And that's a plan, it's an agreement. And then you come back to it because it doesn't work. And when we get the vaccine, I'm just saying when, obviously that's also going to be a huge shift for children to move out of the screen world entirely back into a more real world. And so also if you've got that plan now, you can also then come back to it and revisit it nearer the time. Again, I have got young children. I know that this is not a perfect system, that it's not possible to do all of these other things, but this does allow them to sort of have some buy-in rather than it just being, okay, these are the rules and it's going to go off. Or you're going to have to only do 2 hours. Because if you say to them, you can have 2 hours, they will go up to 1 minute, 59 seconds, right? They're going to go to that 2 hours. If you say to them, and this is what the media plan does, it says, what do you need to get done today? Okay, I need to sleep. Let's build that in first. I need to have some food. Let's build that in. Unfortunately, I need to go to school. I have to talk to my friends. I have to get a bit of exercise. And then when is the time left over that I would build in my media? So rather than saying today you have 3 hours of media every day, it flips it around to say, well, what do you want to get out of your day? And as they're teenagers, they're starting to think about all of these things. And it's just a different way of orienting it. Again, just back to that very first question, it's not about screen time per se, it's about what are you doing? So if they say, yeah, I just want to have a video chat with my friends for an hour this afternoon, and we're all going to do a puzzle or something ridiculous, like they come up with ridiculous things, or I've had them, you know, go on YouTube to learn how to do origami, or like they come up with all of these different things. That's fine because they're actually doing stuff and they're doing stuff together. If they say, I want to spend 3 hours today on Instagram and TikTok combined, or alternate between them, you can say, well, maybe there's other things that you can think about. Let's go back to the plan. So it's more about what they're going to get out of the day. So that's a very long answer. The short answer is the AAP media plan is a great place to start the conversation.
I have a question from the audience. This is from Seth. I'm working with a student doing fully virtual kindergarten. The child has never met any of the people in their class and don't seem to interact with their classmates much, if at all. Could you speak to about how the important parts of social peer-to-peer dimensions of primary school can be supported virtually?
That's a tough one. Do you want to start, Elaine?
I couldn't hear the last part of the question. Could you just repeat it?
Yeah, of course. The last part of the question is could you speak to how important parts of the social peer-to-peer dimension of primary school can be supported virtually?
Oh, that is a really tough one. And I don't have young children who are on online schooling, so I don't have any practical experience, but one point that I wanted to make about their peer relationships right now is that those relationships with media characters and book characters are what we call parasocial relationships that can actually serve many of the same functions as their real friends, and can help keep them from feeling lonely. And so the more, obviously we need to be supporting video chats and other ways to connect with their real friends, but also be thinking about these parasocial relationships they have in this time. They are serving a really important function.
Yeah, and it turns out like these parasocial relationships they end up showing empathy, they develop them across time, they learn these characters, and all of us probably have a remembrance of a favorite childhood character from a book. Or so one possibility then in that kindergarten setting is like, is there a shared book reading, and then that they can talk about their favorite character. And oftentimes there's going to be, and if I'm speaking with a kindergarten teacher, you'll know, like there are different characters that are kind of lots of kids really like. And then that is a starting point for a conversation where you haven't got a real thing in front of you, but if you both really love Elmo, or you both really love Thomas the Tank Engine, then that can sort of start a conversation in those smaller peer groups. And it's starting from a point of expertise. The kid knows, if your child watched Thomas Tank Engine, which my child did, you know all of those different characters and who they're friends with and why somebody is unhappy and why they're happy. And so that can be a really nice starting point for a conversation to sort of invite that child in as well. And all of the basic dialogic reading practices can also be a way to invite that child in. Some people have found that breakout rooms can be helpful, but then you also have to have a monitor in every breakout room, and I'm not sure any kindergarten school has got enough resources to do that. But the other thing that some people have recommended is also maybe trying to meet with smaller groups, one at a time, so that those peer relationships, it's easier to form rather than a big screen, big Zoom screen. So if you can say, okay, well, we're just going to stay the last 5 minutes, these 3 kids are going to stay and we're just going to have a conversation ourselves. This has been something in video chat research. We're sort of breaking up when there's been difficulties in foster care, for example, and there's multiple siblings and multiple families all trying to connect. Having a little bit of time one-on-one or small groups can be quite helpful for kids in that virtual space. So those would be possible things that hopefully help.
That's really helpful. There's another question here about engagement from ebooks translating to print books, but I might take the liberty to expand that question a little further, which is, Rachel, you mentioned when we get a vaccine, right, we will move back from virtual to real world. Have you come across any research, or have you done any research about that transfer from going from a virtual environment to a real world environment and learning? So will the virtual environment today for learning create any disadvantages when we move back to a real world environment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think one of the things that we do know about transfer learning is that it's hard, right? I made that really dramatic point. But what we also know is that connecting the dots is really important. So for example, kids are in the virtual world at the moment. And here in DC, we're moving to fall. And all of the leaves are about to change. And normally if you were in school, you would be getting those leaves and you'd be doing those leaf images and all the rest of it. And what the challenge is going to be for teachers and for families is sort of connecting those dots so that they do go outside and pick up the leaf from outside when they're learning about the life cycle on the virtual world. So we don't want to wait until we're transitioning back. But with any sort of media, and maybe this is going to be a boon of this age, is helping kids connect the two worlds and really making it explicit to them that this Zoom thing that you're going to, it actually means something. It's something important for your life. So when your teacher talks to you about photosynthesis or whatever, then you go out and you get the green leaf and you look up at the sun and help them connect those dots back and forth, because that connection is the thing that's hardest for them. And that's the thing that caregivers are brilliant at doing, even without thinking about it. And that's also one of those things that we really know from picture books, that connecting the dots, connecting those worlds together with language and with experience is really what helps the kids in their language and literacy and helps the kids learn anything from media. So I would say we don't want to wait until we get the vaccine. We want to be trying to connect those dots all the time between the media and the real world. And that's for everybody. You know, for college students that I'm teaching at the moment, it's hard for them to say, well, why do we really care? And so they have to go off and do assignments that connect the dots as well.
I've got another question. So I mean, you've given us a huge amount of guidance around what we should be doing as parents to help our children navigate this new world. Is there anything that we, as parents, we should not be doing? Is there some things that just don't do because it backfires or it doesn't lead to the right results? I mean, is there anything you can provide there?
So there is one thing, but I don't like this one. Nobody as a parent is going to like this one. So it's called technoference. So we can actually quite easily disrupt connections between ourselves and other people by our own media use. For example, I don't have my cell phone here, which is almost unreal, but if anybody wants to just pick up, do you have your cell phone there? Okay, just take a look at your cell phone there, Jono. Okay, look at Jono's face. Can anybody, you might need to speak so that everybody else can see you. He's now got a flat face, and and really try to get absorbed in that content, Jono, because what happens is when I ask you a question, you're going to respond slower, okay? Because, Jono, could I just have your attention, please? Could I have your attention, please? Hello? And so with young kids, and with older kids, you'll see this as well. So they did this study in a restaurant where they just observed people in the restaurant and they were using their phones or not. And at a certain point in time, kids got kind of frustrated that they couldn't get their parents' attention. Never mind the fact that we get frustrated with them when we can't get their attention from the phone. It kind of works in both directions. So one thing that I would say, there's two things that I would say we shouldn't do. One, if at all possible, protect meal times from screens. So try to put screens down during meal times. The second thing I would say is sort of protect sleep. And so you might want to buffer between, and it's not necessarily to do with the blue light, it's not necessarily to do with, but it's more to do with sort of overstimulation and creating that boundary before the end of the day and going to sleep. So if you can create a screen-free time for your child between the end of the day and them falling asleep, they're more likely to fall asleep more easily and you're protecting sleep. And then keeping that screen, if you have like a place to keep it in your house. So that's also very hard, especially with teenagers. But if you say, okay, you have to plug your screen in down in the kitchen overnight. If you can do any of those things, you're doing great. But protect meal times and protect sleep would be the things that I would say you really want to try and do in order to reduce negative effects. And just plain old, really graphic, violent stuff, don't watch that either. That's not gonna, that just doesn't help anybody. Interferes with sleep, creates nightmares, isn't helpful to kids of any ages. Really, really violent media. 2,000 studies, so we kind of know the answer to that one. So those would be the don'ts.
Okay, thank you so much. So want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are at the top of the hour. And just want to again say a huge thank you to Elaine and Rachel for joining us today and providing us with your expertise. This has been super insightful for me personally as a parent, and I'm sure those watching would agree. And Donella, thank you again for helping coordinate. I believe that we will make this content available on the University of Otago's YouTube channel, and we'll also put that up, the link up on the Otago alumni page at otagoalumni.us. All right, thank you everybody. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.